7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Welcome to Position of Neutrality. I know you're noticing there's a little different venue. Don't be disturbed. We've been doing this for a long time, and we do it from wherever we need to do it. We open every meeting of Position of Neutrality with a prayer, and Wayne is in the house to do that.
Oh, Heavenly Father, tonight as we look into step 4, Heavenly Father, reveal to us the old grievances and the old grudges and heal us of the new ones. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everybody. Tonight, as Wayne says, we're in step 4. To those of you that are just coming on and maybe don't know exactly what we do, we've been doing Position of Neutrality exactly the same way for lots of years. We take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why?
Because
The process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. So what I attempt to do is just show you how I find my experience in this book and encourage you to have your experience. And if we both do our job, we'll share a spiritual experience in this room and on this communication tonight. How many of you have been here before and can witness for folks that happens? So by a show of hands, they're talking to you about the spiritual experience that we talk about experiencing and sharing in 12-step recovery is a sensory experience. So when you feel it, I'll know, and I'll call it to your attention, because we would teach you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving a demonstration of the power. So those of you that are used to us in a bigger hall, you hear when we say God, they say power. They say power, because we don't want anyone confused. We're talking about sensory power from within, with whom you can form a simple relationship that makes life better as we come back from these hopeless states of mind and body. So tonight we're going to take a look at step 4, and we're going to start on the bottom of page 63 if you're following in a book. And the authors are talking to us directly. It said, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. So the first question I would ask is, who's the we they're talking about?
the first 100.
The first 100 who wrote the book, the first 100 who recovered in their story of the witness of the first several thousand. So they have evidence that this approach works. Yes?
Yes.
So what they said they did is they launched out on a course of vigorous action. So the question I would pose to the rest of you watching this is, was your first attempt at a 4th step something less than a launching?
Yes.
Okay, so it's possible if you're trying to launch without power that you would not have the same experience they had. Remember, there was a tangible encounter with power in 2, and based on the experience of that, I made a decision to go inward, search fearlessly within, right? Because my power has been obscured by calamity, pomp, and worship. Yes?
Yes.
So if we haven't got you an introduction to that tangible power within, of course you're not going to launch. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. How many of you suspected that the main problem you had in addiction was not the substance, but something deeper? A lot of us suspected that, and everyone wanted to focus us back on the chemical, back on the drug, right? And the reality is, I can't fully concede to my innermost self based on a lie. So if I don't believe it, I don't believe it.
Right.
Which is why I can't ever have my encounter, because I don't even believe I need an encounter.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So we need to, once we know that, look, that's just a symptom of my underlying malady. Oh, okay. So I'm going to find that ease and comfort from another way without going out in the world to get it, which is the whole purpose of that step 2 experience. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So then it says, therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It's an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. Now, I know I read a lot before I talk to you again, and I know that sometimes loses us, but I've got to give you the whole paragraph so you have context, and then we're going to break it down and see what they're admitting to and see if that's true for us. Because in every stage of this, if it isn't true for you, either I didn't explain it well enough or you're not comprehending it. Either way, we have not communicated. So we're trying to make sure you understand. You cannot grow in a conscious relationship without consciously moving into it. You have to examine it with your logical senses. So every step of this should make sense. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we did exactly the same thing with our lives. So the first thing they said was that this is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. How many of us found the facts, did not face them? Probably, if we're honest, most of us, yes? How many of you faced them, but they weren't the facts?
Yeah.
So you know, we're always looking at what the deception is. Somebody felt that. Whoever felt that, that's the power we call God. Just so you know, that's what. Okay. So then it says it's an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. So notice how they said the truth. They didn't say my truth. They didn't say your truth. They said the truth. What is the truth about the stock in trade? How many of you thought you were just a hopeless addict? Piece of garbage, scum, convict, whatever we gave those labels we gave ourselves, none of that was ever true. None of that was ever true. You had a disorder that obscured your identity from you. And then the society gave you a name and it resembled your difficulty and not your identity. Your identity is a child of the Most High. That never changed. Does it make sense? Okay. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. So damaged or unsaleable goods is the way I try and sell myself to you or present myself to you or treat you to keep you away from me, whatever those are, those things that have caused those calamities and things in my life. So we're going to take a look at those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then it says if the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. Guys, all of us fool ourselves about values in some areas of our life. We think our sarcasm is a useful tool when it may not be. We think being witty in inappropriate situations is a useful tool when it may not be. We need to learn to apply authenticity and honesty into all our communication so that no one misinterprets our intent. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I can't fool myself about the value of things as I go out to serve, and I find that certain things that I do to mask from you what's really going on within me, I need to lay that down.
Right.
Okay, so we did exactly the same thing with our lives. So the same as they talked about with the guy that's got broken stuff on the shelf. You don't want to leave broken stuff on the shelf, and no one's going to want to shop there, right? All right, so we took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways is what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. So they assume you're already convinced that self manifested in various ways is what had defeated us, and they assume that because they ask us about that in 3.
Yep.
As a predicate to making the decision. Does it make sense?
Yep.
We didn't even know what it meant, though, but we thought, yeah, okay. Driven by fear, I acted in ways that were not authentic to me, and people misinterpreted me. Or maybe they rightly interpreted that manifestation, but they never got to know me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we don't have to make it up. They're going to tell you the general categories of these manifestations of self so we can find out specifically what applies to us. Does that make sense? So it says resentment's the number 1 offender. So this idea that I can live to hate and hate to live is a false idea. And I understand that some of us come here and that's all we got. But if we're going to be free of the limiting thoughts I have about me, I have to lay that tool down.
Right.
So I'm going to have to examine how resentment has tethered me to events and made me less engaging for the people I now intend to serve. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we've been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. A lot of us are troubled with that when we read it. Remember, the book's written in past tense. Spiritual sickness is not something some of us, at least half of the original fellowship, they were not that acquainted with it. But spiritual sickness is a manifestation of self-driven by fear that causes me to go lower than I thought I would ever go because I had such low thoughts of me that I didn't think I deserved better, or you didn't deserve better, or whatever, right? It's the same thing as the mangy dog you see out on the street. You see their fur all matted up and they don't look good. We know instantly that animal's sick. When we see our brother and sister looking the same way on the same street corner, we think he's weak-willed. Does that make sense? We got to challenge that thinking. Okay, so it says when the spiritual maladies overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. You got to claim that, guys. If any of you are students of that other book, we need this entire psychic change that AA talks about. When they talk about it in Scripture, they talk about, do not conform to the ways of this world, rather be transformed through the renewal of your mind. I need an inversion. I can't be driven by thought and emotion anymore. I'm an experiencer of thought and emotion. I'm driven by the Spirit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So how did y'all deal with your resentments prior to being shown?
On a bar stool.
You guys agree with Sean?
Yeah. Let me tell you what she did.
So we're going to get them on paper so we can get them out and examine them for what they are and move on past them, right? It says we listed people, institutions, and principles with whom we were angry. So it's a simple list, just like Sean says, same way we would gripe and complain at work or on the bar stool. We're going to get it on paper because they're about to be cast out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it says we ask ourselves why we were angry. So I'm going to have a list of things I'm angry about, people, institutions, principles, and I'm going to go down another column and I'm going to ask myself why, because I got to examine it with my logical senses.
Yep.
It says in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, or personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. So they're talking about the experience of we're so damaged by the experience of these people, institutions, or principles that we just can't let go of that hurt. And the hurt is my thought now. I'm usually past that in my life, right?
Yeah.
So I'm only suffering from my thoughts, but I can't get out of my thought loop. How many of you even been years sober and you're in the manner of living and found yourself powerless to get out of your own thought loops? So that's why it's a manner of living. That's why I need a progressive wellness as opposed to a progressive illness, because I need to grow consciously, because as I start responding to the world in a better way, I'm going to find that the way the world responded to me hasn't changed greatly. It's going to come at me. So anyway, on our grudge list, we said opposite each name. Our injuries was our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal sex relations, which have been interfered with. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. You guys understand a self-esteem issue. If I got low self-esteem, I may try and prove myself to be something I'm not. Sometimes I have a low self-esteem and I just tell you I'm garbage and you might as well stay away from me. I do a lot of untruths that aren't useful in order to try and beat you to offending me.
Right.
If that makes any sense. And then it says our ambitions. That's just my hope or my desire for a future outcome. So if I think that somebody else has got a promotion I had, or if I think somebody owes me simple respect and they don't give it to me, I'll live in that. And it is not It is not spiritual to demand respect. I'm sorry, it just isn't. Because that would be transactional. Does that make sense? Some of y'all are feeling that. All right, so we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. Why? This is my life. This is what happened. This is what I'd like to be like in the future. Why do I want to lie about it now? This is really what I was like. This is what happened. This is what I hope to be like in the future. Yes? All right. And then when we were finished, we considered it carefully. Why? Yeah, Sean says his life depended on it. Anyone agree? Yeah, when we realize a lie's not doing us any good and no one's believing it anyway. And I've been dying in that lie for years and years, or walking in a living death. What good did that lie do me? Right? That's what I always tell people. You can't lie to me without my permission. You can lie. You just don't have my permission. I'm indifferent to your lie. Because truth comes with a feel, guys. All you people out there that know, you know it comes with a feel. Okay? All right, so when we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that the world and its people were often quite wrong. What a discovery. But there was a time in my life when discovering other people were wrong was something I shouted from the rooftops. Because I thought I was the first one to discover it. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. How many of you got stuck in others are wrong? If we're honest and we're human, it's happened, right? Well, others are going to be wrong. What's my response is more appropriate question. Yes? Yeah. So the usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. So why would I want to get out of it? Because I don't want to stay sore. All right. So it says that sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. Where's my people that are overly hard on yourself? So you want to be careful about that, because we think somehow that's humble. But it is not. That is not a display of humility. It's a display of either deception from you or deception of you. Does that make sense? But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. The word seemed is in italics in this book. Why would they call our attention to the word seemed? Yeah, the reality is I often took some delight in someone else's suffering or what have you because I thought they deserved it based on their treatment of me. But the reality is that didn't make me a winner. So I only seemed to win. You know, it's kind of like pooping and sitting in it. If all we can do is delight in the troubles of others, we're wasting a lot of valuable time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So our moments of triumph were short-lived. It's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. Now, they said it's plain. They did it after they'd done an inventory and been out serving. How many of you got through an inventory or were in the middle of an inventory and it wasn't so plain yet? And how many of you got through an inventory and started serving others and it became very plain that living in that was just futile? So you're going to have to walk it out, folks. If people tell you, just keep coming back, that's a good suggestion. But do the steps too. Not only do the steps, actually go out and serve. Show others. Because if you will show others precisely how you've recovered, you will get the healing you need as you walk it out. All right. So then it says, to the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. So they just said in a sentence what I took several sentences to say. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it's fatal. Yeah, people need to internalize that. If you have a serious addictive disorder, and you don't do the things required of you to have that disorder arrested, it is my experience that you will die a terrible, terrible outcome. And you'll often take people with you. Okay, so it said, when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. How many of you have a hard time contemplating a life free of anger? If we're honest as humans, it's really hard. But when we understand that we're infinite beings, if you're spending more of your time free of anger than not, are you not freer than you've ever been?
Yes.
Because we think every moment is the moment, and that's correct. But we always live for a future moment or in a past moment, neither of which is real. So what we need to do is start being present more of the time, and then we experience the freedom they're promising. Does that make sense? So it says that the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They telling us how they learned. They seed that anger within them. So the grouch is pretty much what you think it sounds like. You're running around griping all the time. You got a problem for every solution. You ever met that guy? You ever been that guy? You got a problem for every solution, right? And then the brainstorm, it's an old English word, but it might mean two things. It may mean, a bright idea without due consideration. Any of you get a bright idea and just launch out on a course of vigorous action without considering, and then all of a sudden it's a mess, and now it's got to be somebody's fault because why'd they tell me this or whatever? Or it may be a sudden fit of rage. How many of you have been just sitting there all chill, and then something happened or somebody walked in, and all of a sudden you went from chill to unpleasant? Okay, so that's what those things are not for us. And then they go on to tell us it may be the dubious luxury of normal men. In other words, in the human condition, I'm going to see people employing that lifestyle, and it's fine, but it ain't my jam. It has bad outcomes for me.
Right.
And then it said, for alcoholics, these things are poison. And I don't know of anyone's alcoholic condition. That's something for you to examine. But everything in this book is talking to guys like me. And this isn't about how anyone else in the whole world ought to behave. It's how I will try and behave. It won't matter to me how y'all behave. And that is freedom that all of you should seek. Does that make sense? All right, so we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. So what's the key to the future? What's on our list? The truth. Any of you ever heard that? Students out of their book? The key to the future is the truth. We'll just leave it there. we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. What did they tell me? One of the definitions they gave us for insanity: a lack of perspective. I need a different angle, and I need a wider angle. I need to see things from your perspective, and I need you to let you see me as I am, not as I want you to believe I am. Does it make sense? And we're going to have a lot less deception then.
Right.
So we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. So how many of you have felt that? How many thought that your whole future was in the hands of people who were currently mad at you?
Wow.
And the reality is, you can tell me it's silly, and I can know it's silly, but I still believe it.
Yeah.
Because I have not fully conceded to my innermost self that of myself I am nothing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And in that situation, not only am I not acknowledging the power that animates me, but I'm giving what power I had access to them. So I encourage you to seize that back, because you are where you are because your Father says that's where He wants you. You're qualified by identity, not accomplishment. That's the facts. That's the facts about me. Identity, not accomplishment. You want to come against my identity? Bring it. Okay, so we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. Wrongdoing of others, fancied or real? How much of the wrongdoing of others do you imagine is fancied?
90%.
Probably a high percentage. And the reason they all agree is because people don't think about us as often as we think about us. That's just the jam.
My favorite subject.
Yeah, exactly, Sean. But enough of us talking about me. What do you think about me? Right? So the reality is that most of it is fancied, but in the instance where it's intentional and mean-spirited and real, that's killing me too if I choose to live there.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? So I don't live there because it's not good for me.
Right.
All right. So how could we escape? There's a question. We want people to earnestly want the answer, right? The whole idea, eyesight without insight, spiritual blindness. We need you to want the answer. How could we escape? Because they're about to tell us what they found. We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? Another question mark.
Right.
Are we following them? Yes, I've got to get past it, but how? Okay. Then it says, we could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So what's our first inclination as humans? Yeah, and I may even pretend it worked.
Well,
I'm not mad at anyone. I'm just mad at me. I just need to learn to forgive myself. I don't know how many times I've heard, no, you need to believe in the one he sent.
amen. Right.
You're already forgiven. Walk it out. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a divine act, folks. Don't listen to the nonsense. Walk it out. All right. So this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Wow, that's a game changer, right?
Yeah.
What do you imagine their symptoms are?
Let's see, resentment, fear, guilt, shame, remorse.
Anyone agree with Sean?
Yeah, same things that we have.
Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Why am I going to examine selfishness, resentment, dishonesty, fear, guilt, shame, remorse? Because once I know what it looks like in me, then I can ask to have it removed from my eyes as I view you. So I'm not seeing me in you, I'm seeing him in you.
Right.
Does that make sense? All right, so we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So I'm asking not only to remove, but to replace. Does that make sense? This is going to be a logical approach. So I not only want the selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear out of the way, but I want tolerance, pity, and patience in abundance so that I can offer it to my sick friend. And everyone is my sick friend in this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so when a person offended, we said to ourselves, now this is what they did, so you can grow into it, you know precise steps.
Right.
This is a sick man, how can I be helpful to him? Question mark. So I'm probably disturbed when it happens. I may be disturbed out of fear for them, or I may be disturbed by their aberrant behavior. Doesn't matter. I was sent to them for a purpose, on purpose.
Right.
So I got you to ask.
How can you be resentful of someone you're trying to help?
Correct.
You can't.
Exactly right. We got to get that out of the way. We got to walk it out. So God saved me from being angry.
Right.
Thy will be done. Those of you who don't talk in King James language, whatever's going on, that's it.
Right.
In other words, what are you showing me?
Look.
Thy will be done. It's being done.
Yeah.
What am I misperceiving?
Right.
Okay, we avoid retaliation or argument. That tells me there's going to be struggle. Because they told me they had struggle. They had to avoid retaliation or argument. You know what it feels like to avoid retaliation or argument? Most of us didn't have any filters when we got here. We didn't avoid it, we dove into it.
Right.
That's got to go away. Yes? Okay, we wouldn't treat sick people that way, to Sean's point. If I know they're sick, then there's no reason to yell.
Right.
If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Which ones?
All of them. Everyone.
Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. What do they mean, resolutely look for our own mistakes?
In other words, focus.
That's the only thing I might be able to do anything about, is the part I played in my suffering. Even if I had no part in what they inflicted on me, if I'm still holding on to it, I can at least start asking for forgiveness of them through me. Yes?
Right.
All right, so where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? What am I examining there?
Character defects.
So I'm examining my thoughts about the situation, am I not? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. The very reason we suggest mentorship, sponsorship, somebody that knows the process, because we're detached. You're personally involved in the situation you're detailing. You need somebody to help you find your part apart from it, so that you're not delusionally taking something that's theirs or clinging to something that doesn't help you. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Don't try and do this stuff by yourself. All of us need a guide.
Yeah.
Okay, so where were we to blame? Even if it's unforgiveness, I need to own it if that's what it is. Does it make sense? And it can't be just a gesture. It's got to be real. I have to know that I know that I know that because I've been forgiven much, I'm offering myself as an instrument of that forgiveness to all others without restraint. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight.
Right.
How did I transform from holding on to it to becoming willing to set those matters straight?
By looking at their being helpful.
Examining the facts, yes. We take stock honestly. We see if it's really benefiting us in the way we see that it is, and we realize that we're starting to sense a flow maybe at this point. We're starting to grow a little bit at this point. So it says, notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? Question mark.
Yeah.
So I need to chase it back to the fear that drove it, right? Whatever happened. And they talked to me a little bit about that in 3, that there was something that I was involved in that caused this issue. Or there's something I'm currently involved in that's causing this issue. I need to tether the fear and move into whatever that might be. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. That sometimes I think people think is a kind of an exaggeration, and it's not. Fear steals everything from us.
Right.
It steals opportunity from us. It's like, if I did this, it's going to take this long. I'll never get through it. What if this happens? I'll never know. I don't know how many opportunities I've lost because of fear. Okay, so we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So you're going to find your fears as you chase down your resentments. It's going to be a product of it. But you've got fears that probably have driven you all your life, because all humans do. And they may not have a resentment in connection with them. Right. And, most drinkers and druggers have had the experience of sitting places way too long when they were way too sick, and they don't want to leave because if they left, they might miss something. And that same fear causes the fear I'm going to miss something, keeps me from being authentic and faithful in relationships. Because if I commit to this, then what about when the next one comes?
Yeah.
And a lot of us have had all those kinds of difficulties and didn't know that was all fear driven. Okay, so we ask ourselves why we had them. And then they've got some more questions. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us?
Yeah.
See, self is already driven by the fear. So self isn't going to confront the fear.
No.
It's got to be a power greater than myself that manifests. All right, so wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. No one's telling you don't be self-reliant, don't take initiative. Just we're telling you to consider it, then move into it, and then own it. Everything you ever do from here on is going to have a consequence. Are you okay with the consequence because you're okay with the action? If you are, then you'll live without regret. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. How many of you have had the experience of you were really afraid, but you did it anyway, and you put on that cocky, I ain't afraid of nothing thing, and then ended up in a huge pickle? Had nothing but regret. Okay, so perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. So when we say God, we're talking about power from within, right? Power, peace, happiness, sense of direction flowing from within us. So I'm going to start trusting my inner guidance instead of my perceptions of the world, which have proven to be flawed. Yes?
Right.
We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigns. Now, that's a tough pill for some of us to swallow, because some of us, admittedly, had a kind of tough assignment. Life didn't deal us fair parents, didn't deal us fair outcomes, all kinds of things happened to us on our way to our recovery world. And maybe if it was all perfect, you just feel bad about yourself because you were the big letdown in the family. None of that's true, right? None of that had anything to do with you. All of that was preparation for what He's getting ready to have you do. Make sense? Yeah, you're feeling it, so you know it's yours. You claim it when you know it's yours. So it says, just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. How many of you could use a little ability to match calamity with serenity?
Yes.
It's a big deal, because we usually, when we get here, we match calamity with calamity and make a bigger noise. But, calamity's just noise. Silence engulfs, swallows, and laughs at noise. If you don't believe me, go out in the mountains sometime.
Yeah.
The silence is deafening. You can't hear God's voice when you're making noise.
Right.
Okay, so we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God.
Power.
We never apologize for God.
Power.
Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. Guys, if you've been praying or you haven't been praying and you're not satisfied with outcomes, I'm not a guy that wants to tell people the right way or the wrong way, but the one thing is I'm not going to be given something that would be harmful for me, and I'm not the doer in most situations, or any, as near as I can tell. So there is a doer, and then I'm a being. That's why they call me a human being, not a human doing. And so what I'm going to ask is that He demonstrate through me what He can do. This task before me, Father, is bigger than me. So I'm going to ask that You go with me, through me, and before me. And I would ask that You would remove my fear and direct my attention to what You would have me be. And He will give me answers like faithful, honest, authentic, servant-hearted. He'll give me very simple states of being from which to operate, and He will give me the power to operate in those states of being. Then it says, now about sex. Now, I know people start heading for the doors about this time. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Everyone giggles because everyone knows how easy it is to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. So all we're asking is everyone to get honest about it. Have you been the sort of childish attitude about sex and everything that you see reminds you of some sexual innuendo? And did you share that with people liberally and maybe make people uncomfortable? Hoping for a bite, perhaps. So all we're saying is all of us could use a tune-up there, probably. So one school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. And all they advise, guys, is own your own humanity and then stay out of everyone else's stuff, right? If you don't like certain sexual things, then don't do them. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. So what can we do about them? So it's really more about what's going on with me. Again, the book's about what's going on with me and the things I can do to present as a better me. So we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. I know, it goes silent here. But here's the deal, guys. We all have a past. No one comes to recovery without one. And some of them are more colorful than others. But nothing you're going to tell anyone that's done much of this is going to surprise them much. I mean, if you got a really high score, you might impress us. But anyway, all right. So where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? And now I'm really looking, and this is pretty simple stuff, guys. This is how I'm going to inventory my thought life forever. Where am I being selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? And dishonest isn't the lie I tell you. I had to lie to me before I could lie to you. Right. So what's the lie I tell me? It's usually driven by fear, and it's usually based on self. And then inconsiderate means I just never considered. So there may be a thing I just didn't ever even think that there was any effect on you at all when I just blew past you. Okay, so whom had we hurt? Well, there's usually a long list, guys. Once you get the main ones, then you'll have who else was affected by all the ones you had, and that's going to make the basis of your amends list. All right, so did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? So they ask you two things: justifiably or unjustifiably, rather, arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. So you may have had a really jealous or suspicious spouse, and you may not have done anything to do that. We're not trying to take ownership of something that isn't. We're trying to take ownership of conduct that would provoke those types of things. Does that make sense? We're not buying into other people's delusion. We're trying to pierce our own. Okay, so we got this all down on paper, or where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. Why do I want to look at that?
I want to look for a pattern. Next steps.
Yeah, Sean says he wants to see the pattern in the next steps. He wants to see what's real versus what he's told himself. Okay, so in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life.
Right.
So this is really about relationships. So those of you that are damaged enough in the beginning that you don't think you ever want another sex life, that's fine. But the truth is, you live long enough, everyone wants another sex life, as long as you got a sane and sound ideal for it. Yes? Sean suggests he changed hands in order to get his. So the reality is, though, this is all my future relationships. So the product of a step 4 inventory is get a sane and sound ideal for all my future relationships with people, institutions, and principles. Right. It's never just been a sex inventory. I don't know who ran us down that road. It's a relationship inventory, including sex. Right. Okay, so we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? Right. One of the things that I learned about me in an early 4th step was that pretty much every relationship I had at that time was selfish. Yes. And that I have had many relationships since then that I can confidently say to you, we're not selfish.
Right.
And that is a victory from the bondage of self.
Right.
Does that make sense? We ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. So as I'm starting to form these ideals for who I want to be in the future, I need to consult the infinite.
Right.
Does that make sense? Power, peace, happiness, sense of direction. And then it says, we remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed.
Right.
So if we've got a really weird attitude towards all things sexual, let's examine that, because it's got you a little too boxed in, and no one's telling you to, accentuate your sex. What we're saying is, if your ideas are holding you back about how you experience life, then let's set you free. Does that make sense? All right, so whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. So we're not going to tell you what your ideal needs to be. You're supposed to work that out with the power within you. But you got a part to play. You got to be willing to grow toward it. And it's not enough to say I'm willing. You got to walk like you're willing. Right. You may stumble, but you got to walk it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm. And they're telling us, if I'm not willing to do that, then I'm really not trying to do what I say I'm trying to do. And then, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. So now we're back to what I'm telling you. Don't make this just not about the grimiest sexual thing you ever thought about or did. This is about how I've treated people at institutions and principles throughout the course of my life. And I've taken an attitude toward them. How many of you had a bad attitude toward law enforcement because they wanted to tell us what to do? And they never came around when I was doing good, always when I was doing bad. Anyway, they pulled over everyone on that particular sidewalk that night. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. Which one? Each specific matter. Because remember, we've turned our will, our thoughts, and our life, our breath, over to the care of this power that animates us. So I need everything. There's nothing above his pay grade, and there's nothing within mine if I'm walking it out. The right answer will come if we want it. What if we don't want it? It'll come anyway. Carrie Ann says, it'll come. I will have improvement for it. All right. So God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with other persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. So guys, whatever advice you get as you're trying to figure out who you're going to grow into, always consult the infinite. He already knows what he's planned for you to grow into. He's known it since before you were born. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. How many of you have gone opinion shopping? I know just who to ask about this. All right, so suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Now they're going to ask me about the fear that holds me back. What if because if we're that guy that doesn't do anything if I can't do it perfect, and my history says I can't do very many things perfect, maybe I better not do anything. Maybe I should just sit here. Call me next week. I'll give you an answer. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on us and our motive. A lot of people get that twisted and they just don't understand. Look, this is the authors of the book talking to you about their experience in the first several thousand, and the whole book is based on the mistakes they made and what they wish they'd have done instead. So that doesn't mean you're going to get drunk. It means you're going to grow if you want to. So the question always comes back to, do you want to grow or don't you? And if you do want to grow, then you're going to be all right. Go forth. My sponsor told me, what's the matter, Joe? You afraid to go out and show others? And I go, yeah. And he said, pardon my language, Joe, you can't possibly fuck them up any worse than they already are. And that gave me freedom, believe it or not. So if we're sorry for what we've done and the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we'll be forgiven. We'll have learned our lesson. These guys understood I need to be forgiven, and forgiveness of self was not a thing to them. And the reason is forgiveness is a divine act. It looks like forgiveness of self because it's forgiveness power that flows from within me, but it has nothing to do with what I did and everything to do with what he did. So if we're not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we're quite sure to drink. We're not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. So a lot of these first 100 had the witness of all these people that went through and did everything they were supposed to for a time, but they struggled, and eventually they made it back, and some that didn't make it back. So it's all lived history that they're writing about. And those of us that have been in this for a while, we've got a fair amount of lived history ourselves, yes? So to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal. Why do they say earnestly pray? It may take getting deep within. But, because I may have impulses that want me to act out of what I'm trying to grow into. For guidance in each questionable situation, I may have to go back more than once. And for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. How many of you had all of that but not the strength to do the right thing? So we don't want to miss any step of that, because remember, this isn't me, this is him in me, right? The doer. So if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. So always the answer is go find someone to serve. I used to hear it a lot. People say, I'm going to go to a meeting and tell them my problems. And I'd say, no, please don't do that. Go to a meeting and see if anyone has a problem you can solve. And if they can't do any of that, then listen to them quietly without advice. Because some people just need someone to hear them. And they'll read your face and know where they are. All right, so if we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments, and we've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. Notice how they're talking to us about beginnings. On 3, we launched into this first step of action, which is getting authentic with me about who I've been and who I want to be, right? And so I can kind of chart my progress. And because what I had done before was futile and fatal. All right, so we have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. So, guys, you're going to have to go out and show others. You're going to have to make amends for harms done. You have to grow in prayer and meditation. You're going to have to find people to help. Wash, rinse, repeat. Those people are going to show you your old ideas. They're going to be the instruments of the healing you need. And as an instrument, when you hand them the healing they need, that you can plainly see, the healing that you need that you can't see flows through you, and you get it too. So we've commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We've begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. So we're trying to grow into a being that has no enemies. Right? So we have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. Some past can't be straightened out, but many can. And if I'll make the effort as requested, I'll at least have set it to their specification as best I know. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. What did they say did that? Faith. I would challenge all of you at your recovery meetings this week to get up, and when someone asks you about what you do to stay sober, tell them faith. Faith did for me what I could not do for myself and continues to do so. Faith is the mainspring of all accomplishment. When you walk into something that never was, someone before you had faith. We hope you're convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. So are you convinced now?
Yes.
And if you have already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you've made a good beginning. That being so, you've swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. And that's it. Next week we're in 5, 6, 7. Thank you very much.